Okay. Good morning, everybody. Mainly that's a good morning for those people that are watching it later. We spend a few moments waiting for people to come online and to start watching, and then we'll get into what I consider to be one of the most interesting conversations and topics that I could actually discuss because of its sort of enormous breadth and its great mystery. Right, so anybody that wants to ask questions, please just send them in the comments. I've just received a question, somebody how to watch. I'm going to ask my comptroller to just answer that on the Symphony Choir page, if that's possible. Margaret? Somebody's just asked on the choir page to watch. Beverly, Etienne, Helga, it's great to see you guys. It's wonderful to have this opportunity to talk to you. I'm going to put a sort of a disclaimer. This is a conversation largely about my perspective, how I see these things, and also the thoughts that I have, hey Barry, about conducting and music and the orchestra as a whole. I will say that conducting is one of these incredibly sort of Wizard of Oz kind of things. Never look at the man behind the curtain. It's clouded in mystery. I mean, it's been something that has only really been a major profession in the concept of superconductors from mid-1800s, and the names attached to it, names of great mystery and greatness and great power over the years. I mean, we've had the Kleibers, both Erich and Carlos. We've had Herbert von Karajan, Mahler himself, the name Toscanini. These are names that have instilled great admiration to the public, oftentimes great fear to the musicians that worked with them. I mean, the stories of people like Toscanini are legendary. The stories of Strauss, I mean, they're videos created out of these incredible, and mostly men, obviously. Thankfully, that has changed an enormous amount in the last few years, and we have more and more female conductors on the podiums, rightfully so. But I think things have changed, and I certainly think that conducting is a bit more than just those great, enormous names that we have revered for so long. I think there's a lot more to it, and I have a philosophy of conducting that I think may be very similar to a lot of the people that I work with, and I thought it'd be kind of nice to give everybody insight into what I think it's about. And then also a little bit about how the orchestra works. And for the choir members, because this is largely for the members of the symphony choir, I hope you're all well. Missing you guys a whole bunch, but hopefully this will be we'll be together in rehearsal soon. All right. I think if you want to be as cheesy as possible, but it's a fairly great analogy actually. If you think about the word conductor and you think about electricity, and you think about a conductor in electricity allows electricity to pass through it, I think that is an enormously vivid image. And that for me is what I base the entire concept on. Your job as a conductor is to allow that music to pass from that score through to the choir or the orchestra or whatever, be it your elementary string ensemble, be it your high school band, your symphony choir, your major orchestra. It's to travel through those to guide them, help them out, and to create a whole to then communicate to the audience. And I think that ultimately is a visual that I always try and remember when I'm going into performances. Maybe not always in rehearsals, but I think that is ultimately the job of the conductor. Its essence is to go and try and interpret this music, most of which was written 200-300 years ago and further. And some of it is written, in the last 20 years, 50 years. It's still being written, a lot of great modern music. And in that case, we have the luxury of composers being alive to guide and help. But with composers that have passed away, that is where the research and the study comes into it. So I'll give you a little bit of a background of that. But I think apart from this concept of conductor, as sort of the English word, I think the next thing is to understand the concept that it's all about communication. Conducting is not in my opinion, just about waving your arms, taking the fame, taking the glory. I think that's a wonderful side effect. But I view conducting as something in the position of 100% a communicator. And for me, conducting is imperative. The ability, the skills that you need are required no matter what level of ensemble you are working with. There's always the same essence, the same principles to what you have to do, if no matter what sort of level. How you do it, I think, is maybe a slightly different. So we work on this concept of communication. I'll tell you what, the one thing about it is that this is a mystery in many ways. I have found many times that you have this sort of telepathic moments, these moments of great telepathy, which helps me believe that telepathy might actually exist. Things that happen in complete and utter silence, just through gesture, or sometimes even through not moving at all. You can create a sound, and it's incredible when you stand up and conduct, sometimes how the slightest change in your body, in your eyes, in your hands can actually affect the entire sense and feeling of the people around you. And I think that's where the mystery lies. I mean, there are fantastic stories of rehearsals with orchestras and guest conductors, and I think the one story was Karajan. And suddenly the musicians are talking about it. Suddenly the orchestra started playing better. The sound changed. I think a timpani player was in 4 million bars of rest. And it may have been a Fritz Wengler. I can't remember exactly the story. But what changed was Karajan, or Fritz Wengler, or whatever, the music director at the time, entered the room. He made no sound. He just came into the room. I think that is the essence of what you can achieve purely with a presence. And that's the fantastic thing about conducting, that communication, sometimes without words, without gesture, but just with presence. But that's the mystery. What are the basic realities of it? I think it's a lot more complicated than people think. I think you have these wonderful concepts of people standing up there waving their arms, and I get, obviously, a joke much of the time is, well, what do you actually do? I mean, you just stand there and wave your arms. Well, maybe. But as I've said, a lot of how that arm waving goes will dictate what happens next. Hi Pat, Sarah, thank you guys for checking in. What happens next? Okay, and you can't sort of just end there. There's a lot of work that goes into the background. What is also interesting about music, and I think that then comes into the concept of communication, is you have to answer the question, what does music as a whole mean to you? I'm not very big on sort of denying a person's enjoyment of another style of music, no matter how much I may dislike it. I know we all have styles of music we think are worthless or worthwhile, but I think then in that essence, what is music actually? What is its purpose? My purpose is that it communicates something, be it just purely entertainment, be it a depth of feeling, be it a change of heart, be it an uplifting experience, is ultimately what music should do for people. And then this massive concept of community. And that's where the role of the conductor becomes so important. Your job is to create that sense of community by looking at the music you have in front of you and communicating that to your orchestra, your choir, your kids that are singing or playing off instruments, whatever it may be. My most uplifting performances, there are many. Some always stick out in your mind. There's an interesting comment in the Inner Game of Music that the great ones that you were in the zone, it's not the terminology he uses, but that's a modernization of the in the zone. You don't even remember them. And I must say that's been something I have noticed in my life. You remember the moments that went wrong, no matter how few they were in your career. But that's the incredibly interesting thing about music as well. Just that sort of personal, the things that went wrong will stick with you, the humiliation that goes around it, the embarrassment that you felt. I mean, mostly people around you probably didn't even notice. But you think about those particular moments till the end of time and learn to try and deal with them. And you forget those moments when things were great. I must say, in modern memory, and this is not just because it's for the symphony choir in general, the Missa Solemnis of Beethoven, for me, was a performance that truly helped me that truly helped me see the world and life in a different way. And the performance itself of our choir, our community choir, and the University of Cape Town, young people, older people, middle age, so this gamut of ages from age 18 up to, I won't give it away to the members of my choir, but sort of older than 18, to create something magnificent, like a piece like that, is something that will stay with you forever. I can't tell you anything about what happened in the performance anymore, but I know how it felt afterwards. I've had other ones in the past, and I think a performance of the Eastern Cape Philharmonic Tchaikovsky 5 for me was a massive highlight. And then there have been highlights that are not really uplifting, conducting the Cherubini Orchestra in Italy, meeting Maestro Muti and watching him rehearse. I think that was, for me, an incredibly uplifting experience to see a man of that brilliance rehearsing with an orchestra that good and that young. So that's enough, I think, about all the mysteries in the background. I think what is interesting is, for those of you that want to know, what goes into it? Well, obviously, like any job, and that's what people forget. Sometimes it is a job. You have to do the preparation, you have to do the work. You've got to go through I think the very, very first thing you need to be as good a musician as you can be. The older conductors were all very highly skilled in an instrument or two instruments, along as being a great musician. I think a lot of that came out of that. It's a very different way of training these days than it was 100 years ago, even 60 years ago. And so we're having a very sort of different conversation now, I think. But I think, in essence, being as good a musician as you can possibly be is the beginning where you start. Then it really comes into the study. You have a score, and sometimes those scores have got 42 different lines going on the page. No, I'm glad. Great. I'm very glad to see that you guys enjoyed it so much. You sometimes have anything from 4 lines to 42 lines on a page of music, and it's your job to sort of put that together and to try and interpret that, and interpret what the composer wanted. Not necessarily what you want, but what the composer wanted. And that's what makes it exciting, right? Beethoven 5, there are hundreds of recordings of Beethoven 5. Why is each one different? It's because every single person that interpreted it found something, different tempo, different phrasing, and that's what keeps it very, very much alive. Yes, the music was written, almost 200 years ago, but the interpretation and the creation of sound, that is very, very new, and every single day can be slightly different. I know the members of my choir, you know that some weeks are just difficult. We're learning notes and we're struggling to get something under control. And then other weeks, suddenly you just turn around and it just feels or seems easy. That's the next part of the conductor's job, riding those waves with your ensemble. And I think that comes from your basic preparation. You've got to understand the essence of most instruments as best you can. I don't believe you necessarily have to learn all the instruments, but you need to have a very good knowledge of what each instrument, what each voice type does, what each voice part is capable of, and then work from there, understanding through analysis and studying in the same way that you study to get any kind of position. You have to do that with your scores, taking your scores and actually learning them, reading through them, breaking them down, putting them back together, and slowly but surely creating this picture in your head. And I'm very big on pictures. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I really enjoy creating music with this concept. It doesn't have to be a person or a tree or pictures like that. Sometimes it's purely, in my head, is purely just sort of colors that are personal to me, feelings, moments that I would create in my own head as we move forward and create a phrase and create a sound. That, for me, certainly with our choir, is very, very important, creating the sound that we have when we go to performances. After that, you have to have the knowledge of the performances. The analysis comes in at the very, very beginning. I have always been taught by my very first conducting professors that before you go and listen, before you look at historical background and history, you need to be able to take the piece apart through analyzing its harmonies, its rhythms, its phrasing, how the piece is put together on the grand scale. This is the only way you can break it down into the smallest element and then ultimately build it back together in your mind to create an overarching phrase or an overarching story throughout the piece, if there are words, and even if there are no words. I mean, Tchaikovsky said about his Sixth Symphony, which was written just as he was dying, and he passed away very quickly after it was premiered. He said, this is program music, which is a music that tells a story. He just didn't know quite what the program was, what the story was. So he had some understanding. And knowing that your composer had that in his mind has to help you with your study and your analysis. And that comes after the actual musical analysis, going and looking at the piece in the history of that composer, the history of the time, what was he going through, or she going through, what were they, were they struggling? Let's take a Fanny Mendelssohn, or even a Clara Schumann, brilliant musicians in their own right, both of whom their music has to suggest something more than just creating pretty music. Both of them not allowed the sort of position in society because of they were female composers. Both of whom it was perfectly okay to be performers, brilliant performers in the case of Clara Schumann, but not composers. That was a man's job. In fact, that's even in an email from Mendelssohn, sorry. That's a letter from Mendelssohn to his sister somewhere along the line. So understanding that context is essential. As a conductor, there are certain liberties you can take while interpreting piece. Absolutely. Liberties are how I believe, how you see the phrase, how you see it all coming together. And that's why there are so many different arguments about, is this one right? Isn't this right? Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not at all. Take a great conductor and a great musician like Leonard Bernstein. A lot of the time, the things he does, not necessarily I would see on the page when I was analyzing a score, but his performances are still magnificently exciting. I'm not going to go against Leonard Bernstein in a public forum, but he made great music, but at the same time took a lot of liberties. And those times of liberties are also changing now that we have greater research into performance practice, instruments that we used at the time. That's all the context that you have to put together as you are putting an interpretation together. My favorite female conductor, I have a number actually. I've had the privilege of working with Joanne Folletto at Buffalo, and I have the most amazing amount of respect for her as a musician and a music director. I think in many ways she changed the way music directors operate. She's incredibly good with musicians, with the board, and she's an active music director where she gets involved. And my time, the few days I spent in Buffalo and a workshop with her was incredibly uplifting moment, as just to watch a great conductor and a great musician and a great leader, which is a big part of it as well. And that's what I haven't even got to yet. The other one obviously is her name escapes me now. I'll come back to it in a minute. The first woman to conduct at the Proms. I think she's also a superb musician. And then there was a woman in Cape Town many, many years ago, Sarah Caldwell, who is very much forgotten. And she came to Cape Town quite late, right at the end of her career. But when I got to the US and started reading a bit more about her, it turns out she created Boston Opera many, many, many decades ago. So there's a person who bucked the trends and created something amazing and set the path for the great conductors to come forward, and also created a role model for women in the conducting field. I think after you've done the analysis, and that's the weird thing about conducting, is that conductors never ever make sound. The very first recording I did put that into context for me, and I was listening to the recording, and I suddenly realized that if my name wasn't on that CD, nobody would know I was even there. And that's kind of an interesting thing to always remember as a conductor. You are not making sound. You are working with the people around you to make sound and helping put it together, trusting them. And I think this is the next, Mariana, I will come to that in a moment. I think that's a very, very important question. Hi, Nali. It's great to have you here. I'm gonna just show the choir. I'm coffee this morning with the mug that you bought from me in New York. It says Maestro, one of my favorite, of course. I think the insecurities come up with the next level. Studying and analysis, absolutely, for me is not a problem. I enjoy it immensely. The next thing is getting to rehearsals and performances. And in that, your skills are different. There you become almost more psychologist than you do musician. You're dealing with groups of people, sometimes not necessarily brilliant or professional, and other times highly professional, highly skilled, with fantastic concert masters. And that's where you need to understand the orchestra. And I'll get into that hopefully in a little bit. At those times, I think, is when you have your greatest insecurities. Remember, some days, and I know this is maybe a terrible thing to say, and this is letting you behind the curtain. Some days it really can just be a difficult day at the office. You aren't quite ready or whatever, didn't sleep, just like any other employment, other job. And you still have to get up there in front of people and find a way to communicate what you feel the composer was hoping to say. So in those moments, definitely, I have felt incredibly insecure, and obviously, with all careers, you have your ups and downs, and those create insecurities, and you remember, you stand on the podium and you wait for the applause at the end. And then you look for reviews and people, for certainly when you're a young conductor, often waiting for people to tell you how much they enjoyed it or whatever. And then one negative comment can throw your entire feeling about a concert, can throw it completely off. So I was saying earlier about you remember the negative things, oddly enough, and that's a big part of the sometimes it is just a knick-knack kind of day, and so it becomes a bit difficult to work beyond that, just like any other career, because in the rehearsals there your communication has got to be at its absolute highest level. You have to firstly communicate your ideas, not just physically, but also verbally. You have to work on the respect for your musicians and your group around you. You have to work on a way that they respect you. And remember, you're dealing with groups of people. It's not a one-on-one situation. It can be anywhere from 10 grade ones to the Symphony of 1,000 by Mahler, which 200 plus people on the stage, or an opera where you have directors, you have singers and orchestra, and you have a lot of things going simultaneously. And that's where your preparation is important. The better you know the score, the better you know your context and exactly what you want to achieve, the easier it is to adjust later. How do you deal with the negativity? I think that's a conversation for a whole different day. You have to work through it. I think you got to accept it for where it comes. You have to try and I must say a problem for me is that I analyze whether it was correct or not over and over again. And you have to be able to say, okay, maybe they had a point. How do I fix it? Or this is coming from their problems or some other position that they have, and let it go. And that's always the difficult thing when you have this, because it is so unbelievably personal. That's what the great thing about music, right? It's so unbelievably personal. You can have a high-powered position. And I've noticed this certainly in the choir, in the community choir. I've got the most amazing people in the choir. I've had judges and pilots and ladies that run empires in the corporation. I'm not very good at tree hugging. I'll get to that one in a minute, Eddie. That's also a great one. Yes, that Benjamin Zander captures it very carefully. I lost my train of thought. Sorry. Yes, you have all these heads of industry, heads of their own businesses, people doing great things out in the world, and they come to choir, and they become very, very subservient. I think that's a bit of an aggressive and a harsh word, but they become very insecure, because you all know in my choir, you've all had to do an audition with me. And I like to believe it's the easiest possible audition that I can do. But many of you come in there terrified. Why is that? When, what most of you do for a living is so much more high-powered than that. Why? Because you are putting yourself as a person, an individual out there. Exactly, most negative and positive vibes. Let me just go back to that one question. Excuse me. Eddie, I actually don't do much meditation before a concert. I'm one of the very lucky things that I can focus incredibly quickly. So I had a situation where I went on a Saturday many years ago. I went and I think I had a morning rehearsal, I had an afternoon rehearsal, I came home, cooked dinner for about 7 people, and went and conducted Rigoletto that I hadn't conducted with a rehearsal. I'm very, very lucky in that. I don't have to get in the zone necessarily before performances. People that know me know I jump up and down. I talk an enormous amount before a performance. So there's an enormous amount of energy that I have to channel, and I do that in different ways. I'm not, but that's, as I'm getting older, that might change. But for now, it has always been, I get very excited. I love what I do. I love conducting. No matter how difficult the rehearsal process, the actual performance for me is something that I thoroughly enjoy. And I have always felt incredibly comfortable in a performance. Again, rehearsal periods have been very, very difficult sometimes in my life. Never with a choir, never. That's always a treat and a joy. But they have been tricky. But the performances, you know what? You're there for the audience. You're there for the composer. So you may as well enjoy it. There's a wonderful story about Jacqueline Dupre, who said she suffered for many years with performance anxiety until she took some time off and she realized, why get nervous? She loves playing for people. And she said from that moment, she bounded onto the stage with enormous amounts of enthusiasm. And we all know what sort of cellist she was. Demonstrated subdivide compound beat. That's a very complicated question. Yes, well, somewhere along the line, I do workshops mainly for beginning conductors, teachers, people just to work on their hand technique and their non-verbal communication skills. And the next time they have, Nadi, I'll certainly let you know, and you're welcome to just audit, and we often do them with the choir. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Glenn. I appreciate it, especially with the altos. Always love the altos. Yeah. Yeah, so Nali, if you ever have an opportunity, we'll keep you informed. We do those workshops, and that is a place where I do discuss exactly that. Michael, I generally do try and consider the negative comments and from where they came. It's hard sometimes. It's very, very difficult, and I think that is one of the hardest things because, as I was saying, even with the choir members doing a very straightforward, simple audition, is so nerve-wracking that any sort of negativity, when you put yourself out there and your interpretation and your understanding out there, is very, very hard to take, for me anyway. I know there are many other conductors that have no problems at all, but if you go read the histories and the biographies of the great musicians, many of them suffer from that exact same thing. And I think maybe that is where some egos are ultimately developed, as an attempt to block any sort of thing that will get in the way of you communicating and creating the music. Go altos. I think, honestly enough, I think passion is something that you add later. I think that is something that is supposed to come out in your final preparations, and your love of the music, your love of the people you work with has to be there. And there are days where you and the ensemble don't necessarily agree and sort of won't ever come together and you're just different personality types, and that's something you then have to deal with as well and understand that is what you're going to get, and that's how you still have to do that job and do it to the best of your ability. But I think the biggest question is that with conducting is that, what exactly is music as a whole? And once you answer that, I think you have a far easier transition into conducting. Oddly enough, I think choirs, Bev, my experiences are almost always memorable with the choir. I mean, we've all had performances we weren't happy with, we know that, and sometimes it's been magnificent singing, but just a poor audience turnout, and that, that leaves one feeling a bit sort of insecure or a bit down about all the work you did. But as a choir, you can do no more than what most of you are doing. be as prepared as you can for rehearsals, commit to your rehearsals, commit to singing, and commit to the process. And I think that's where the Missa Solemnis, I'm using this as a wonderful opportunity, because that is an incredibly difficult piece for the choir. And what I said to many people as the difficulties began to sort of make people feel like we'll never get there, you have to trust the process. If you trust your conductor and your musicians, and the musicians, and the conductor trusts you, you will get there. I do believe you'll get there. And if the conductor has done his job or her job, and that is to choose music that the ensemble can handle, you will get there. Michael, I was talking about that earlier. At the moment, the one that truly sticks out is last year's Missa Solemnis. I've had many with the symphony choir, and it's not just because I'm on this page. It just really was a magnificent work, combined with a choir that committed everything to making this happen, and then also with the young people of the University of Cape Town Symphony Orchestra in the Sarah Bartman Hall, the history, the power of this music. I think that really stood out in my memory. I had some wonderful performances in the UK. With Bev and Watchu, but I had some wonderful performances in the UK and Italy. It's no problem. I wanted to talk about that, where I got to conduct the CPO through the UK, as well as an ensemble called 12, and I got to conduct in Italy the youth orchestra Cherubini, an orchestra handpicked by Riccardo Muti at the most beautiful theatre in Ravenna in Italy, and then to perform in those 6th century churches, and to experience music in those early churches, and you realize how much the venue starts to play a role in how composers wrote their music. And so we've actually, in the choir, we went on a search to find a venue that is as close to that as possible, and we came across the Lutheran Church on Strand Street, a church that was built similar time as Mozart and Beethoven and Haydn music was being performed, and I quite enjoyed performing in that acoustic. So those concerts have become quite memorable. The Mandela Trilogy in Italy was truly special, and then traveling the UK for 5 weeks with the production, getting to know the people, and the different theatres. I mean, to Royal Festival Hall, to be able to conduct there was truly special. Yeah, Bev, we always got to watch the conductor. That is essential. Remember, the conductor is not just about watching and not just about ego. It's remember the conductor has so much going on sometimes. You have this choir, and then Margie, and then you have an orchestra potentially around you. So what is that orchestra made up of? I mean, it's made up of 4 different groups of instruments. You have your strings, you have your woodwinds, you have your brass, and then you have percussion. And you have to manage all of that at the same time. The better the orchestra, the less you have to cue, the more you have to do to create a phrase and create a sound. The more inexperienced the orchestra, the more you have to cue, guide, lead people, and help them get over their own insecurities and take on that role as well. So within the orchestra, and I think Benjamin Zander has used this an enormous amount to show how a business works. There are all these tiers of sort of control or management. The conductor is the person ultimately, hopefully, in control. Not always. Sometimes the orchestra can take over. The second one, sort of in charge of that all, is the concertmaster. That is why you shake the hand of the concertmaster that sits in the front of the first violins. They do an enormous amount to keep a performance. Thanks, Claire. I like to think I'm good at multitasking. The concertmaster is somebody that I have always felt you need to respect. You need to work together with to try and have an understanding of the music that you are trying to create together. If not, yes, he is very, very talented and has done wonderful things, certainly now in Germany, that Albert, yes. Anyway, so your concertmaster, that's why you shake their hand. Somebody asked me that the other day, is to sort of greet this person as a representative of the orchestra, acknowledge their position, and then from then on, each section has a principal. They're supposed to communicate with the concertmaster and the conductor, and then that transfers into their section. In the woodwinds, they have to breathe together. Some orchestras are so specific that they used to need the same fingerings, the same bows, obviously the strings, the same bow stroke, and so there are all these layers of management. If you're interested in that sort of thing and how that applies to business, Benjamin Zander's books are very, very direct in that one. I do often go in a different direction when it comes to musical concepts. When it comes to Benjamin Zander, but certainly his business structure is very, very interesting. The orchestra being a microcosm of far greater management. Jenny, I think it can be. You got to understand, what is the purpose of the baton? The purpose of the baton is to help over distance. Help a little bit more clarity. It's sort of like a highlighter for the gestures that you're trying to create. So it's interesting because the baton technique is often very personal, and it all depends on where you are hoping the orchestra is watching. The tip of the baton at the hand, and that's where you train an ensemble. Sometimes, certainly for choral music, I find it easier to use my hands because I can get a slightly more shaped sound. I don't need to do a pulse necessarily at the same thing, but I think it is a personal choice as to what you're trying to achieve at that moment. Sometimes the hands are just freer than holding a stick in your hand. Pat, it varies these days. Thank you, Helga. It varies the number of rehearsals and the orchestra, and a lot more and more has got to do with funding. You know, back in the day, they would have many, many rehearsals to really work a piece together, work a sound. Now, because of costs, you have to reduce the number of rehearsals. Thank you, Jenny. How much time is spent with soloists? It all depends on the soloist. If they are exceptional and you've done it with them before, you come into one rehearsal and a concert. I was talking to a friend the other day who's a member of the Bavarian State Orchestra opera in the Bavarian State Opera House, oboe player, and she was saying they do Richard Strauss operas and Wagner operas on one rehearsal with the staging. So it really depends. Sometimes you have a young soloist that you want to work through exactly what you want, and then you have more time that you dedicate to working with that soloist. All right. So 11:37. I've sort of gone through as much as I can in a very simplistic way. Obviously, this is the tip of the iceberg. The rest is actually just hidden and much more difficult than is actually able to express. But it certainly is the most wonderful opportunity as a career to do this and to work with these people. I must say, as a career, you go around the world and meet the most amazing people and have the most wonderful experiences with all different types of people. And for me, that's what it's about. Because music is about community, about communication, and that is how I approach conducting, with that basic principle: community, communication, and giving your audience something that they are. Thank you, Jenny, I appreciate that. Giving your audience an experience, the experience that they were hoping for. Not just entertainment sometimes. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. And I tell my students that often. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. Playing a concert for fun. Don't be down on that. That's not a bad thing. That sometimes we just need to have fun. We just need a few waltzes in our life. And in whatever helps you get through the day, Margaret is indispensable. Whatever helps get through the day is your choice. And I think as a conductor, I try and remember that all the time. And even if a piece and I don't have an agreement, this piece and I can't quite find each other, I will give it as much time and effort as I can to get that composer's intentions, because ultimately it's that. My pleasure. Margaret chirps perfectly, I know. Thank you, Bev. Thank you very much, everybody. If there's any one last deep-seated question that you've always wanted to ask, now is your time. Yeah, we do. With the symphony choir, I think we're doing great things. So that's a great place to be. And Margaret is indispensable at those rehearsals. I thought at first you said great dictator. Margaret is... Right, it's a pleasure, Jan. You know, and anytime you have a question, tea is now, actually. Anytime anyone has a question about this, you're welcome to ask me, preferably to my choir members, not in rehearsal. How are the rolls? Yeah, they were okay. Weren't my best. Now it's time for hot cross buns, and it's great to see you, Rudy. Thanks for that. It's time for making hot cross buns and rusks. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. We'll see everybody in the choir on Wednesday, and then within the next week, 5 a.m. It is early. Thank you for getting up so early. Pleasure, Lance. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you to Margaret for her continued inspiration to keep it light and not too deeply intense. Lance, I'm willing to look at that. Yes, we can do basics online. Maya, I think this is the only platform for us right now to make the Mass in B minor work, because it requires that much. It's the one piece that scares me more than the Missa Solemnis is the Mass in B minor. It's a pleasure. The next one is 11 o'clock next Monday. I'm still working on a topic that will come out on Friday. I've never run out of things to say. Thank you very much, everybody. And if you want to watch again or just tell your friends, this will be up on the Symphony Choirs page. Thank you very much.